said it's the most evil thing you've ever heard. Conscription. I mean, I
Yeah,
can
I mean,
tell
I
you,
stand by
like, wait,
that.
you just talked about the Holocaust.
The Holocaust is disgusting for the same reasons I'm against the
No,
draft.
it's
Like,
not
it's
disgusting
mass
for the same
murder.
reasons. It's not this. It's not the same. The Holocaust and conscription are not the same. And honestly, it's kind of downplaying the Holocaust. If any state that immediately gets invaded, like basically just dissolves instantly and won't like do what's necessary to protect it, then we would have lost the American Civil War. We would have lost World War One. We would have lost World War Two. Like none. We couldn't have won any of these wars. The Soviets would have lost to the Nazis too. And then what would have happened then? Then all the Russian and Slavic peoples get genocided under Lebensraum. And I mean, it like sometimes you need to do what's necessary in order to protect the greater good.
I know a lot of LGBTQ people in the military fighting, like some of the most brutal, I would say, from them, because what Putin's regime represents for those people, they see them as the ultimate evil. If you look at Russian propaganda, it's all, we are fighting the decadent West and their, LGBTQ propaganda. Like, yes, of course there's injustice towards the LGBTQ community in Ukraine, but compare that with Russia, compare that, like, those people know what they're fighting for, because for them, they're going to be not just repressed like everyone else in Ukraine, they're going to be targeted very, very extremely hard.
Konnichiwa.
Hello?
Hello, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on again.
No problem, bros. How's your weekend?
Pretty good. Pretty chill. I mean, could be better. I live in Arizona. It's really hot here, but obviously compared to what you're going through, it's probably not that bad.
I'd rather be in
So,
the Donbass than Arizona.
really? Oh,
Yes.
shit.
I would never be caught dead in Arizona.
I mean, to be fair, it is really hot here. My AC was broken too, so that's never fun.
I, I,
Of
I,
all
I,
places.
I apologize to the good people of Arizona.
Yeah. So, before we start this debate, I just want to acknowledge something, right?
Yep.
I obviously do not live in Ukraine. I am
Okay.
obviously not going to be as educated as someone who lives there in the flesh and has to deal with this firsthand. So, forgive me for that.
Yeah.
But obviously, this is something that's been all over the news recently. And I have some opinions about it. Yeah.
Okay. No worries. Everybody has opinions on foreign policy. Everybody is allowed to have an opinion on an issue if we're giving them aid. I guess my only like big thing that's always a pet peeve of mine is when people talk about things they haven't, that's very obvious they haven't like studied, or they haven't like looked into that deeply. A good example of this is when I hear somebody like say like, I can't believe we're giving Ukraine $50 billion, but we can't, and that's causing all this inflation or when that's obviously not the case. When you talk about like Biden spending bills of like $1.9 trillion and like these huge amounts, it's not even comparable. Aid makes up actually a tremendously small amount of the American federal budget. And it still makes a tremendously small amount of the American federal budget, even with the billions we've been sending to Ukraine. And so like, as long as you don't like say anything that as long as you don't start like bringing things into conversation you don't know a lot about, then like it's fine. It's like, who cares? Like, you can talk about whatever.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to that specific point, I mean, I would personally argue, I think the US spends way too much on military anyway. And this is like, I mean, there's more like, if you want to like cut the budget and like diverge it into things that would actually be more helpful to the American people, it's probably more helpful to like, a lot of the unnecessary stuff that they're doing over there. Cause I think it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to just like go over like a brief summary of my opinions?
Sure. Could I just say something quick on that? That I believe the United States shouldn't have to spend as much as it does on the United States military. I hope, in the face of this aggression from the Russian Federation, countries like Germany might actually start picking up. Definitely, since this is actually more strategically important for Europeans than it is necessarily for Americans. Yet we're the ones still bearing the brunt of this aid to Ukraine, bearing the brunt of military support for Ukraine as a total percentage. There are other countries like Estonia and Poland that are doing more as a percentage of the GDP, so I want to make sure they get credit. But then you look at countries like Germany or Italy, which are not picking up that like aid, that amount of money that they should be giving, and that amount of military support they should be giving, even though the European Union actually has more people in it than the United States. And so, yeah, I would say that while, of course, the conditions that we find ourselves in right now, where America is giving the brunt of the support, are not ideal, you don't really get to pick and choose like when exactly a war starts and happens and who's going to have the weapons, so who can send the weapons, right? Uh, there's never like a good time for the war to start. You don't get to really like choose it, you know?
Okay. So I'm just gonna go into my opening statement if that's okay with you.
Okay.
So, in my opinion, I see a lot of war like stuff going on. It's pretty scary. I mean, this is a country that didn't exist. I mean, was part of Russia before 1991. I think risking nuclear war between the United States and Russia, which some people seem to be all too comfortable with the possibility of, just seems like a really dumb idea. It's scary. Also, I am of the opinion that like Russia has a few demands that Ukraine is refusing to even entertain or compromise on. When it's like maybe if we make those demands, the war could just simply end and then more innocent people do not have to die. So I see it as like morally reprehensible that people would look at that and then say, actually, no, Russia, I can't do anything to even entertain the idea of giving into Russia because Russia bad. And it's like, well, maybe like, yeah, is it ideal to like give Crimea to Russia? Probably not. But if doing so ends this violence, that's probably a good thing to end the violence. I think joining NATO is dangerous and heads more towards a nuclear war. I do not want a United States-Russia conflict. I do not want the U.S. to be involved, personally speaking. Also, obviously, I mentioned previously the transphobic law and also affecting people also always tell me this affects cisgender men. Yes, it absolutely does. I think trapping men in the country is evil. And I think trapping trans women in the country, despite being women, is just also transphobic and also evil. I think, to be fair, though, what Russia did when they started the war was pretty evil. I do not support what Russia did. They just kind of started a war because. Now, in Putin's, I guess, defense, I don't defend the guy. He thinks that like they're part of like their land. I think Ukraine wants to be independent, but I can see why he thinks that like, oh, you know, they're culturally similar in some ways, but I don't think a war is justified. Like, don't kill people. Yeah. Sorry. It's kind of a
Okay.
lot.
Okay. So, yeah, I wrote a few of your things down. Let's see where we start with. Let's start with nuclear war. That was one of the first. I think that was the first one you said. So I believe that we should not cave to somebody waving their dick around. Definitely if they don't plan to use it. And I do not think in this instance that the Russian Federation is even in a position to use nukes in response to military aid. Now, this would be a legitimate concern in the long run, like in my opinion, if we were putting American boots on the ground, or if we were directly deploying fighter jets and trying to do a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which I know Ukrainian politicians have asked for. I believe I understand why they're doing it. They don't want their civilians to die. I mean, right here in my hand is a part of a Russian missile that exploded over the house I'm staying at like a few nights ago, right?
Oh, wow.
So I understand why they want that, but it's just not practical given that that would mean a confrontation between two nuclear armed states. But the precedent of one nuclear power giving a country weapons to defend against another nuclear power is nothing new, and it's happened multiple times in world history, and no nuclear war took place. I mean, Russia can beat its chest on this issue, but we haven't crossed any red lines, really. We haven't. We haven't crossed any nuclear red lines. A great example, I could give you a historical example, would be, and this is one of the most evident ones, this is the one everybody knows about, it's the Mujahideen. And it wasn't just us giving support to the Mujahideen. It was us and this is the part people forget, China, another nuclear armed state that gave support to the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets. This was during the Sino-Soviet split. So the Chinese were allowing us to like set up like bases in China to monitor Russian like technology and positions, and we used their donkeys and China to like basically go into Afghanistan and transport them weapons. And how did that end? 10 years later, the Soviets left the country. There was no nuclear war, and the Soviet Union even eventually collapsed. The only nuclear disaster that happened in that time really was Chernobyl, which is completely unrelated. And so I do not think we've crossed any red lines when it comes to putting Russia in a position where it has to use nuclear weapons. If anything, I think us moving back here on nuclear weapons, saying we can't give military aid because that might start nuclear war, even though I don't think there's really any real risk of it happening here, because it might start nuclear war. I think what that's going to do is tell Putin, hey, I can make bogus, ridiculous claims about nuking this country, nuking that country, then everybody's going to back off, and I can be as brutal and totalitarian and evil as I physically want to, even though nobody crossed any like historical precedent on like what's a red line.
Yeah, I feel like you're giving me a lot of examples of, well, World War III didn't happen in this case, so therefore it's probably not going to happen. It's probably okay to do so. I would argue that just raising tensions in any way just puts us in dangerous territory that for the U.S. we really don't need to be involved in. I mean, we've had so many instances where the U.S. has gotten involved in foreign conflict and it's just not worked out. We made it worse.
I mean, I guess for me, I would just say, like, I understand that, like, anytime two nuclear powers have a disagreement, or definitely a geostrategic disagreement or any conflict, there is the question of, well, these two powers have nukes, right? And that's very scary for people. But to be quite frank, I'm more scared of the deteriorating state of a lot of nuclear weapons facilities in Russia and that causing a nuclear war than this particular conflict causing a nuclear war. About like these weapon systems which have not been updated, these launch control rooms which are like deteriorating, and that even existed a little bit in the United States, and a lot of nuclear states which haven't really maintained their nuclear like systems post the collapse of the Cold War. I guess like you're saying, like, but well, tensions are rising. Well, yeah, of course, this is geopolitics, this is, you know, conflict, but we can't just say, well, because nuclear war is a threat, we just got to cave. We just got to give them whatever the fuck they want. We got to just back off because they have nukes and that's scary, even though we also have nukes and that's equally as scary. We, the French, the British, it's as if we think that the Russians have like almost zero consideration for the fact that if they start nuclear war, they also all die. If anything, they're probably going to be left worse off because they're the ones who started it. And the whole international community is going to look at them and say, you're the ones who started it. You're the ones who did the invasion. We're not backing you on this. Then there's going to be the French launching nukes at them, the British launching nukes at them, the Americans launching nukes at them. The Chinese probably ain't going to help them. Why? And for what reason would they help them? Russia's going to be too isolated internationally. They don't want to set the precedent of everybody should nuke everybody and destabilize the world while China's trying to build itself economically. So I just don't think it's right now, without the crossing of any like red lines, like we're going to go in and we're going to tell you have to give up like Kaliningrad or something, like this is now Lithuanian territory. Unless we do something like that, like I honestly think the threat is quite low and we shouldn't cave to bullying like this because it's only going to encourage this behavior later. And then instead of talking about Ukraine and the risk of nuclear war now, we're going to be talking about the risk of nuclear war with Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, and Poland, Moldova.
Yeah, well, I would say my opinion of giving in to Russia is not even just because of the nukes. I just think if you give Putin what he wants, Russia is going to stop attacking, and then less innocent Ukrainians are going to die. And I don't think it's justified to just like be like, well, actually, let's not stick it to Russia, guys. We have to make such a point to not let them have anything that it's okay for Ukrainians die. It's more important that we stick to our beliefs, guys. And that just seems really dumb to me.
Well,
I don't understand.
It's not me saying that. It's Ukrainians saying that. If I'm going to be, and now this is like my personal example, but I cannot find a Ukrainian who tells me to compromise with Putin. I remember having this interview with a refugee called Roxanne in Poland. It was in Lublin. It was in Lechna, which is it's not in Lublin. It's like 40 minutes out from Lublin. And I was talking to them and interviewing them. They have a husband who's back home fighting, defending the country. And she said she wished she could go back and fight with them because she also wants to defend the country and she misses her husband, but she has to take care of the kid. And when I asked her, like, do you think that Zelensky's government should compromise in any way or et cetera, she was like, no, do not compromise with that man. You cannot compromise with that man. We should not allow them to just bully us any longer and take our territory. They don't want to continue this historical trend of Russia brutalizing Ukraine, which is the historical precedent, whether it was the Russia banning the Ukrainian language during the Russian Empire, whether it was their annexation of Crimea, whether it was the last 8 years in the Donbass, whether it was the Holodomor, whether it was really whatever any Russian monarchy would do in Ukraine. They don't want to continue that trend, and compromising with Russia, all that's going to do is kick the can down the road. It's going to kick the can down the road, and the conflict's going to start again in 2 to 3 years once nobody's no longer paying attention, and Russia can manage a proper invasion of Ukraine, one that isn't as disorganized and fumbly as it is currently. And I don't want to kick down the can down the road to another generation of Ukrainians that get killed and slaughtered. I hate this, and I'm going to be very blunt with you. I hate this narrative of, well, I care about the Ukraine. I actually care about Ukrainians because I don't want more innocent Ukrainians to die in the war. So Ukraine should give up its territory and compromise. But then you go to talk to Ukrainians, and they're going to say, no, we don't want to give up our territory. We don't want to compromise. We're done doing this with the Russian Federation. We want to keep our territory. The Ukrainians have learned the lesson of Bucha, that the Russian military will execute civilians, kill its political opponents, and rape civilians. And that wasn't just in Bucha, that was all across territory they were controlling around Kiev. And we're going to now say they can permanently do that in Kherson, Mariupol, the Donbass. Why would Ukrainians ever want to accept that deal?
Well, I would say, first of all, I mean, it gives you 2 to 3 years to leave the country if you want to. I say that's a plus for anyone who's wants to get out. Also, how can you not be scared of nuclear war if you're saying all this? You're saying all these awful things about Russia. If Russia is so scary, they can't be compromised with, and they're such a threat, why do we trust them? Why do we blindly trust them not to retaliate against the U.S. for helping Ukraine? That just seems silly.
Well, a country can be brutal and use fear and brutality as a weapon to brutalize a population to try to make them submit, and also be able to have the rational conclusion of, if we use nuclear weapons, we're all going to die, including us, right? They can still have that conclusion, right? For example, if you look at how gangs operate, right? And I would compare the Russian government to a gang, to a mafia. They're a mafia state, in my opinion. They will go out and they will rape, they will kill, they will slaughter, they will do all these terrible, terrible things. But they are not going to go out and start bombing police stations. And if they know that the repercussions for that are going to be so great that they can't handle it. And to me, that's what the Russian government knows. That they know if they nuke America or they nuke the world, the repercussions are going to be too great. But if they brutalize Ukraine, Ukraine doesn't have nukes anymore. They agreed to the Budapest Memorandum, which we also agreed to, which basically they gave up their weapons for the guarantee that America and Russia would not infringe upon their territory and would support them if someone did, which we agreed to, and we're trying to fulfill that arrangement. The Russians violated that arrangement. So I don't think it's that simple. And for the idea that they could leave, I mean, that's the problem, though. They don't want to leave their homes. I wouldn't want to leave my homes. If the Chinese came and said, okay, Maryland's now part of China, my response wouldn't be well, I guess I should just move to California and hang out with the California cucks. No, it'd be, I want to defend my home. And not to mention, not everybody's going to leave, right? This happened in Crimea, where the Tartars, who have historically lived there, had their political advocates executed and killed and thrown in rivers after, that Russian annexation of Crimea. And hell, in a lot of these instances, they don't even have an opportunity to leave. In Bucha, they didn't have an opportunity to leave. They were trapped there by the war, and that's why over 1,000 civilians there were killed. Some girls as young as 14 have unspeakable things done to them. I mean, it was... So I don't think people want to leave their homes, number one. And number two, they might not even have an opportunity to.
Well, I guess my point I'm trying to make is that if he's willing to do all of this horrible things, then it doesn't, I mean, I could be wrong about this, but I've been hearing reports that the dude has cancer. He's on his deathbed. And, why would he be against, world violence? He's going to die anyway. Why not just nuke the US and just go all out and punish them ultimately? I mean, he's doing all these scary things.
Because Russia is not just one man. Vladimir Putin does have the most control out of anybody in like Russia, but there are oligarchs that have a say. There are other people who would have to carry out the command. This is actually not unprecedented in Russian history. There was somebody who was supposed to actually like launch nukes from a nuclear submarine who denied the order and like was like, let's wait a little bit, let's see if this is real, and that ended up saving the world. So it's not just Putin has the button, presses it, and nukes launch. He gives the order, it goes to somebody else, which then goes to somebody else, who eventually have to actually launch the nukes. And if one person along that line says, no, I'm not going to have my whole family get blown to smithereens to serve this moron because America's giving Ukraine military aid due to his failed and quite idiotic invasion, then it doesn't work. He can't. And again, I don't think Putin, I know some people have the madman theory. I don't think Putin is an idiot. I think he's a terrible, terrible, terrible brute who I hope gets a bullet one day. I'm team cancer in this case for once, right? I'm rooting for cancer. Go cancer. Solidarity with cancer. But he's not going to destroy all of Russia because of American military aid. I don't believe he's going to do that. It would be a stupid calculation.
He is a bad idea. I'm just saying, if you think he's so reckless and is willing to do these awful things to Ukrainians, it's like, I mean, why wouldn't he go even further? I mean, I don't know. I hope he doesn't. Obviously, I don't want World War III.
Well, I just told you why I wouldn't, because it would mean the end of Russia as we know it.
I guess that's possible. I want to ask you a question though. Like, what happens? Have you ever like met anyone in Ukraine who like supports Russia? Like, how do the locals? How do they treat people who support Russia?
I haven't, and I assume they would not be very nice to them.
Yeah. So, because if someone has a different political opinion in the country, people are just going to be very mean to that person.
I believe that the circumstances, they deserve it under these circumstances.
I mean,
let me be clear. If I'm in New York the day after 9/11 and I'm team Al Qaeda, I can't be that surprised if someone beats my ass.
Well, I would argue actually the treatment of Muslim Americans after 9/11 was pretty terrible, even though they're not terrorists. A lot of people
I don't wait. I didn't say if someone's Muslim after 9/11.
No, I know.
I said if someone's team Al Qaeda after 9/11. Those aren't the same thing.
They're not, but a lot of people in the U.S. were ignorant and saw that way, and ignorance transcends borders.
Okay.
I worry, Well,
no, it's just like, okay, can you really be that surprised if somebody like who had their whole family blown up by a Russian airstrike because Russian chauvinism continues into the 21st century, right, is going to not be happy if someone stands up and is like, yes, I support that airstrike. Fuck you. Like, yeah, no, the person cannot be that surprised if they're not accepted in the community.
Well, I mean, when you put it like that, yeah, supporting airstrike. I don't know if they. Really,
Abraham Lincoln literally arrested people who supported the Confederacy during the Civil War, and he's known as a national hero for good reason. We got rid of the Silver Legion and the German American Bund during World War II. This is not anything new. This is not anything crazy. This is what all states would do if they were in Ukraine position. This is what most people would do if they were a Ukrainian in their position.
Well, when people are talking about supporting Russia, I think what they typically mean is they support the idea that like Russia claims the territory because like they believe that they're culturally connected, or people in Russia, a lot of them don't even believe the violence is happening. A lot of them have bought into narratives that actually the Ukrainian people are the ones causing violence and stuff.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of people are schmucks.
Yeah. Let's see. Also, I was watching.
Oh, can I talk about something? Oh, 1 second. You said trapping men in the country is evil. I don't think it is. I think this
Why?
is.
Oh. Ooh.
I believe in the draft in situations like this. Absolutely.
Oh, no.
Wait. Do you believe that America was right to have a draft during the Civil War?
I'm strongly against the draft. Like, you're literally murdering your own citizens at that point.
Let me be clear. If the state needs to protect itself from further violence, requiring upon your citizens to complete a moral duty of defense of your homeland is absolutely morally permissible in order to stop Russian soldiers from breaking into your village and raping little girls and slaughtering civilians. And I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. I'm saying that because that's the reality of the situation. When you're a country that's been invaded, you don't get like a list of flowery options of how can we like, fight against the Russian Federation while being the nicest little angels and not having a draft, not increasing taxes, not doing anything that could upset anyone or possibly, no, let's not have curfews because, people like to go outside and party. No, you have to go into complete survival mode in order to save your nation state. It's necessary.
Well, that's the thing. I'm more of a pacifist in this aspect. I think if there's not enough citizens that are willing to purposely sacrifice themselves for the country, which is a personal choice, by the way, #pro-choice. If people are not willing enough to then that country has no right to exist because there's not enough people willing to die to defend it.
Okay, so do you believe
exist anymore?
Let me ask you a question.
And at that point,
okay? Do you believe that Russia gives a fuck if their citizens want to go and fight or not? The answer is no. I can send you hours of transcripts of calls Russian soldiers have had with their mothers saying, they're telling me I'm going to go home, but then I never get to go home, and I want to leave. All my friends are dead. This sucks. We're not eating food. All of our food's expired, and they're going on and on and on about how much it sucks. And it sucks for good reason, because their invasion is bad. But at the end of the day, they might have been tricked into signing contracts or conscripts against the Russian Constitution. We're still sent in, at least 500 that I can know of. They're still trying to do covert mobilization. They're taking people in the so-called DNR and LNR, and they're like mobilizing like crazy. They're bringing it up like conscription ages all the way up to 65. They're taking disabled people and mobilizing them. They're even cannibalizing training unit. Like, it's crazy what they're doing. And the reason why is because this invasion is shitty, and it's very difficult to convince the average Russian, definitely with their population like not being, Russia doesn't have the best demographics right now. It's hard to convince them to fight. But you want to know what? Russia doesn't care. They'll do it anyway if they have to. And that's because Russia wants to control and subjugate Ukraine. They want to do that. And if they want to do that, they're not going to care about somebody's individual liberty or individual rights. And so if Ukraine is in a situation where they're getting invaded by somebody who does not care at all, and it's much, much, much more powerful than them, then they have to say, look, I know it might suck, but we have to make this moral calculus because of one of the strongest world powers in the world are invading us. We don't have a choice. We're not in a position to, pick and choose when it comes to like who we can get to the front to fight. And so, yeah, I guess for me, like, this would be nice if all countries, and this would be fun and fine if all countries thought the way you're talking right now, where nobody had conscription and nobody had forced people to go to war. But that's just not how nation states work. And that's not how Russia works. So why are we going to ask Ukraine to play by a different rule set when it comes to conscription than a country that has like 4 times the population and much more firepower than them? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, I personally believe that it is more moral to concede and just let the other country take over than it is to just let your citizens die. When you're murdering, you're basically performing a mass murder on your own citizens at that point. That could easily be avoided by just giving them control of the territory. And I'd say millions of people then don't have to die. So then why is that not
because then the people who get screwed are the little girls who get raped, and all the political prisoners who get executed, and all the people who lose their homes and towns that they've lived in for generations, and all of the civilians who still get executed because, again, the Russian government doesn't care. We can just look at Crimea for precedent. We could look at Bucha. We could look what they did in Cherniv. We can look what they did at Sumy. We can look anywhere they occupied, where they tied people's hands behind their backs and executed them. You're talking about like, oh, well, this is murder because civilians are going to die in a war. Civilians are going to die no matter what here. The Russian government doesn't care. The question is whether or not they're going to be able to control this territory and trap these civilians and trap them in a place where they can go through their papers. Oh, you don't support the Russians? Okay, we got a special facility for you. And they end up in a Russian in a river like a few months later. They've already forcefully deported over 1.9 million people to the Russian Federation. It's not only about killing. Mass deportations are also occurring, forced deportations, mind you. So yeah, they don't want to be subjugated like that. They don't want to live under an authoritarian regime.
I just don't understand why they can't just be like, hey, if you guys need to free
Is this
from
your
safety
genuine
while
position?
It is, absolutely. Yes. Why can't we just say while Russia's starting the attacks, okay, let people flee to like Poland or whatever country you want to flee to, let them go before the Russia actually get that way people can leave. Instead,
Okay.
you're telling men that they can't leave, and only the women get to leave, and also it's transphobic because they're basically treating trans women like men despite being women. I just have so many issues with it, just on a fundamental level. It is just pure evil.
It is pure evil. Was it pure evil for America to conscript people to fight the Second World War against the Nazi regime?
I tend to think so, but also
Okay,
in
well
that
then
case, it's probably the most justifiable historical example
Okay.
of that.
So
But I don't
the
think
difference
it's ever
here is
justified.
when we're talking about Bucha, that's a little different because it's only 1,000 civilians here, 1,000 civilians there, and we don't have death camps. So where is the like for me, it's look, this is an issue of survival. You benefited from Ukraine's roads, society, policing, social programs, all this stuff. You've been a member of the society. You've benefited from that protection. Now it is your time to give back to society and defend it. And not only just that, but also to defend your neighbors and your children behind you, right? And I'm gonna be completely honest. I am perfectly willing to conscript people if it means less people get slaughtered, less people get killed, less people get raped at the end of the day. Which, yeah, that would be the case if the Russians win. I mean,
okay, but you're telling people to mass commit suicide, and that the
it's not
preservation of the state is more important.
Stop using these moralistic mass commit suicide. Really, is that what they're saying? Or do we have a word that actually describes what this is called? And it's called conscription, right? Mass commit suicide. Okay, yeah, totally. Mass commit suicide. Why would they have the mass commit suicide? It doesn't even make any sense. It's not because they're not putting a gun in their mouth and shooting. They're putting them in the military and then telling them to fight. That's not suicide.
Okay, all right, well, you're telling people to risk their lives to protect the preservation of the state, and telling them the preservation of the state is more important than their individual lives. I think that's fascistic as fuck.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. I think it, when we talk about what exactly the Russians have done in this war and what exactly the Russian goals are, I think, yes, absolutely, yes.
Well, I just don't.
This is the position of basically every government ever. Every government in the world would do this in the same exact position, and every society in the world would largely support it in the exact same position.
Well, I mean, when I said earlier in the video at the very start that I'm again, I want to lower the U.S. military budget. I mean, that's part of what I'm saying here. I don't like militaristic states. I don't like societies that think that. I'm very against it.
Well, I mean, I guess, look, if you want to make a country that's a complete pushover and gets all its people killed within a few years of forming, that's your business. But most societies don't want to do that. Most societies want to be able to say, we will defend ourselves. We will not let you roll in and institute whatever you want to. The Ukraine wants to be an independent state because it wants to rule itself in a different way than Russia rules itself. It has a different culture, a different history. That's why it's defending itself. If you think if any state that immediately gets invaded, basically just dissolves instantly and won't do what's necessary to protect it, then we would have lost the American Civil War. We would have lost World War I. We would have lost World War II. We couldn't have won any of these wars. The Soviets would have lost to the Nazis too. And then what would have happened then? Then all the Russian and Slavic peoples get genocided under Lebensraum. And I mean, sometimes you need to do what's necessary in order to protect the greater good.
I don't think that murdering people are, I don't want to use those words.
Yeah, thank you, please.
I just think that because essentially you're telling people that their lives are worth sacrificing for the greater good of everyone else because of their
Yes.
age, because of their sex.
Yes.
I just think that that's like the most evil thing that I've ever heard.
The most evil thing that you've ever heard. Why do you use such moralistic like the most evil thing that you ever heard? Okay. I can tell you something that's worse. There is footage out there of a Russian soldier raping a baby. That to me is a lot more evil.
That is evil. That is very evil.
What do you think is
I
more
just
evil? The Russian soldier raping the baby or conscription?
I mean, we're talking about two very, very
Well, you
bad
said it's the
things. I
most
just think
evil
that
thing
one
you've ever
thing-
heard, and to me, what I just said, it actually sounds more evil to me.
Well, I think one thing affects a lot of people, and I'd rather be traumatized for life than die. So, but I mean, if we're gonna really play these games, that's a stupid game to play.
But
'cause
you're
it's
the
obviously
one.
all evil.
You're the one who played the game. You said it's the most evil thing you've ever heard. Conscription. I mean, and I
Yeah,
can
I
tell
mean, I
you,
stand
like,
by
wait,
that.
you just talked about the Holocaust.
The Holocaust is disgusting for the same reasons I'm against
No,
the draft.
it's
like,
not
it's
disgusting
mass
for the same
murder.
reasons. It's not this. It's not the same. The Holocaust and conscription are not the same. And honestly, it's kind of downplaying the Holocaust.
Like, the Holocaust killed people because of their religion, because of their race. The draft kills people because of their age and sex.
Okay, let me put it this
It's
way.
different.
I'm pretty sure if the Nazis armed the Jews the way we arm soldiers, I think it would have ended a lot differently. It's kind of like when you give someone a machine gun and a bazooka and a tank, like that doesn't sound like murder. That just sounds like conscription. You're asking them to fight for the state. Okay, you could say that they're sending these young men to possibly die for a cause you don't agree with, but it's not murder, right? It's not. And it's definitely not. It's definitely not anywhere comparable to the Holocaust. I mean, you're dying on a hill that's unnecessary.
I just think if your country is so great and your country is so worth protecting, then enough people in the country would be willing to sacrifice voluntarily. And once you hit the point where people are not volunteering,
the thing is though, no other state will play by these rules, and so you're asking to play by a rule set that no other country in the world is playing by, and so ultimately you get trumped and fucked. If Russia only was like, we're only going to send people who specifically check this box, I want to fight in this specific invasion, then Russia wouldn't even be able to invade the country, right? When you listen to these people who want to leave constantly, like, yeah, these people don't want to fight in the front lines, this war fucking sucks for them, right? Then they wouldn't be able to invade, but they're not playing by those rules, and so they go in and they fight and they invade. So if we had the Ukrainians playing by a different rule set, then it's much larger and much more powerful neighbor. We're just basically saying, like, okay, Ukraine, like, there's nothing you can do because, you know, you got to play by a different rule than everybody else so you can seem more morally virtuous in comparison.
well, don't we both agree that Russia is this evil force that is willing to stop at pretty much nothing to cause violence unjustly? At that point, why even bother fighting with them at that point? If they're just going to cause this harm, why not just do what you can to get the harm to stop?
Yeah, I want to do what I can to get the harm to stop by winning the war.
But then you're just causing more harm. And
No,
you're becoming just as bad as they are.
That's not. By fighting back against your rapist, or by fighting back against your attacker, by fighting back against the person brutalizing you, you are not as bad as your brutalizer. You do not just lay down and take it.
I mean, I don't think I understand, like, it's obviously probably worse to be the aggressor, but if you look at the pure action being done, the action being done is the same. I mean, you have one side shooting at another side.
Yeah, but this is moral. It's called self-defense. If somebody punches me in the face, I have the right to punch them back, right? It's completely morally permissible for me to defend myself.
If someone punched me in the face, I wouldn't punch them back.
Well, then you're a pussy. I'm sorry.
Flee the situation. Yeah, I'm fine with that. You know, I'm fine with that. I would flee the situation because I don't want to get hurt and I don't want to hurt other people.
Well, the problem is it's kind of hard to flee the situation when the situation is your home, your village, your city, and in the place where 44 million people call home. It's not that easy to just pick up and leave.
I mean, it's war-torn already. They're already throwing missiles out. Why not just, like, go and be safer somewhere else? Like, it sucks, but they chose that. I mean, there's nothing you can do about them now.
Are you a troll?
never going to be the same.
I refuse
No,
to
I
believe.
genuinely feel this.
No, I don't
genuinely feel
believe this. I think you're fucking with me.
I swear to God. I swear to God, I genuinely believe this.
I really don't believe anybody actually believes what you're saying right now.
No, but I do. I do.
No.
I don't know how to get that through to you. Like,
No.
I don't know how to get that through to you. Why is
Okay.
this such an unbelievable
One
thing
second.
to be
I'm
against
gonna
war?
1 second. I'm gonna message somebody, see if they can come upstairs and talk to you.
Should I be worried?
No, don't worry. I'm be interested if they would want to talk to you. 1 second.
Are they gonna yell at me? What's
I
going
don't
on?
know. They might if you say something stupid. Oh, he's coming. Oh shit. Anyway,
Okay, should I be scared?
No, don't be scared. I just think, I just want to see how a Ukrainian would react to what you're saying.
You're really gonna put me in this situation, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I mean, why not? I mean, look, if you believe something, you should be able to say whatever you want to say to everyone, right? I mean,
I don't like. I think we've had a pretty chill, mostly civil conversation. I don't want to.
Do you think of bringing up a barbarian? What is this? Is just a Ukrainian? I'm just, I think they might be interested in coming out.
I don't know. I feel like the way you're talking, there's.
I think it's important to platform marginalized voices, and I think out of all the peoples in the world, Ukrainians are pretty marginalized right now. So I feel like in order to hey, this is one of the people who actually would be conscripted, right? This is one of the. Hello, Mr. Conscript. Welcome. Salam. I never heard to say it. How do you say it? I'll never be able to say it. Okay, so let me just move over here. Sit down, my Ukrainian brother. My Ukrainian brother. Okay, I can move this over here, or you can. Okay.
I can't believe we're doing this.
I'd rather not.
You'd rather not wear these?
Yeah, I don't like sticking stuff in my ear.
Then how are we gonna get you to listen?
Okay, never mind.
Let me just lower my
hold it
audio real quick.
Hello.
Okay. Can they hear you? Let me check the audio. Say something quick.
Hello.
Yeah, okay, I can hear it.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Kind of this side. Okay, perfect. So what's your position?
Regarding what
Me?
exactly?
I'm asking her.
I was.
You've been listening.
Yeah,
okay.
we were watching.
So what's your opinion?
Yeah, no, you're good. What was the last thing you heard me say? Because I was going on, and then it just kind of stopped.
I think actually he was in the middle of a statement, so whatever you said, we missed all of it.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me right now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just tell you about how our family was planning leaving or not. Actually, half of us did leave. So at the time we were starting to get surrounded. We were watching videos of drone footage of families being shot apart by Russian tanks, by Russian soldiers, up close. Just purely civilian families. You could see it, the cars had civilian written on them. They had a white tied to. Okay, so we were watching. You use the wonders of technology these days to find out what's happening, and it was kind of like watching the weather, but a lot worse because you were watching drone footage of entire families being torn apart by tanks, of people being shot, in cold blood for no reason at all. You could clearly see they were civilians. In the end, we evacuated half of the family. We evacuated the women, children, the old, and the Arab half of the family stayed because we were used to explosions and we were being able to get some sleep. Most of our village evacuated. There was almost no one left. No one could stand, living 24 hours under shelling. And even half of the family that left, they had to use a 4x4 vehicle, and they had to go off-road because the normal roads were being destroyed by Russians. Anyone in sight was being shot on sight. And we've had so many incidents like that from personal experience, from stuff we've seen and in public, online, on Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, whatever. It's just, it's so complicated leaving, actually being able to. And we're lucky we have cars, we have internet. Imagine people with animals, with children, with only a bicycle or only nothing. We've seen it's just so difficult living. It's not just a matter if you want to or not. It's even being able to facilitate that, especially in a country like Ukraine, which is very, very, very large. Wouldn't you agree, though?
It's like
It's you can't even describe it how large and far everything is. So that's just there. So just saying, leave. How would you act when you're like the roads that you can drive on, that you know how to drive on, and there's no GPS, you don't have any old styled maps, and you're looking of videos of people like you being shot at by tanks, by armored vehicles, by soldiers, and you have to take the decision, leave or stay. Do you think that's an easy decision? Do you think that's just, oh, okay, I'll take my chances, I guess, like it'll be much more safer to go brave the roads than stay here and hope a shell doesn't hit me directly?
Okay. Can I say the statement I was going to say before? I'm
Sure.
really sorry
Sure.
because I didn't get to get through. First of all, everything you just said, that sounds awful. Like, obviously what's going on right now is really evil. Like, it's not good. Like, I think I just want to say real quick, like, you're a lot nicer than I expected you to be, and I really appreciate that. Like, I was kind of half expecting this to be like, oh, you stupid ignorant American, you don't know anything, and then just to be like a yelling match. But it wasn't that. You were very informative, and you taught me a lot. So I can thank you for that. And apologies if anything I said, bothered you, obviously. But I stick by what I said. I mean, leaving home, obviously, it doesn't sound like it's easy. Like, I obviously understand people have like a ties to where they live. But if I were to live in that kind of area, or if something like that were to happen where I live, I would just leave without even thinking about it. And people can say like I'm a coward or whatever. They can say whatever they want. Like, if someone's attacking where I live, that's not even a choice. Like, I don't even have to think about that. I'm just like, I want to be safe, and my safety is like number one for me. So I'm just kind of surprised that people would choose to stay where they are, and it's very weird to me because I don't understand that.
Honestly,
And it also,
on a
you
personal
mentioned,
level, I never felt afraid for my own safety. It was always for the safety of those around me and those who can't do anything or who can't, be able to just leave. When you're alone, it's easier. For a lone wolf, it's an easier journey. But when you have a pack and you have responsibility on top of that, that's very different. That's much more difficult, Dying, we're all gonna die. Being afraid of death is like being afraid of birth. But the idea of watching your loved ones dying around you and not being able to do anything, or like being the person who put the family in the situation where you're gonna die, that's very different. You can't just, you can't use these easy statements like, I would just leave. It doesn't apply. It's a totally different calculation logic. This would take days. You would, it's your literally your life on the line.
Yeah. Can I ask you something else before? Like, you mentioned something before, like a few minutes ago.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Okay, so you mentioned earlier before that, like, people were like really trying to fight. They weren't even letting people unless they had experience and stuff. I'm just curious, like, if that's the case and people are trying but they're not able to, then why is that like cisgender men, transgender women aren't allowed to leave the country? If like they have enough people to fight and that's not an issue, then why are they trapping people in the country who don't want to be there? That just seems like needlessly cruel to me.
I have an answer, but it might not be very politically correct.
Okay.
Could you hear me?
Honestly, it's because they're only allowing women who could give birth flee the country to just safeguard the population to be able to produce. Men are much more disposable from a biological standpoint than women are.
That just sounds really sexist and transphobic and awful. Like, I don't like that people are being discriminated against by their sex and stuff, that they can't leave the country, whereas women can. That just seems really wrong
for
to me.
people like those, I think, like, I know a lot of LGBTQ people in the military fighting, like some of the most brutal, I would even say, from them, because what Putin's regime represents for those people, they see them as the ultimate evil. If you look at Russian propaganda, it's all, we are fighting the decadent West, and their, LGBTQ propaganda and their, queer agenda, and we need to protect our children from this. And like, yes, of course there's injustice towards the LGBTQ community in Ukraine, but compare that with Russia. Compare that, like, those people know what they're fighting for, because for them, they're going to be not just repressed like everyone else in Ukraine, they're going to be targeted very, very extremely hard.
It just is so immoral and awful to like trap those people in the country and not let them leave when they'd be so much better like leaving, and they should have the choice to be able to leave. Like, to prevent them from doing that just is like really, really cruel. I don't know how anyone could justify that. That's like, I don't know.
It's sad, but it's our reality, and maybe, like, I don't know, a better bureaucracy could help with that, or a better system. But for now, from an existential point of view, I wouldn't agree with you. You can't imagine the solidarity between Ukrainians right now. Like, even before this war, like, I've never felt something like this. People would just be, you would look at each other at a gas stop, and people would have it like, we're ready, yeah, we're fucking ready for this. Whatever comes, we're all one. And that's still the prevailing, emotion everywhere. We're fighting this together. It's an existential threat for us. We understand that what Putin's regime brings us is absolute slavery, is absolute destruction. It's a life that Ukrainians, since independence, have been fighting against. Like, a lot of people think the Maidan was for the EU. It wasn't. Most people don't care about the EU. It was against seeing the government repressing students, against seeing the government shutting up its own people. And for me personally, and I've always been an anti-military person my entire life. I didn't believe in weapons. I didn't believe in wars. But this war, this is an existential war. You don't choose it. It chooses you, and you have no choice but to keep fighting, because the other option is not just worse for you, it's worse for everyone. And right now, Ukrainians aren't just dying for Ukrainians, they're dying for the rest of the free world.
But why can't you just let the people who want to fight, and the people who want to leave the country and be safer somewhere else do that? Like, why trap these people in your country when they don't want to be in a war-torn country that's like harmful to them? Like, I just don't. I can't think of any justification for that.
More or less, this is happening. Those who really, really, really don't want to fight are leaving in different ways, but they're still leaving. No one's forcing anyone to fight.
But like, what I'm saying is they're forcing them to stay in the country. Like, what if they want to leave the country? They can't leave the country.
Well, the country is at war, and like, even staying and just, being part of life is important.
That's silly to me. Like, you're not, like, just being there in a war. Like, I don't understand that argument at all. Like, I just, why would you want to make
this is what I was talking about earlier, that it's probably hard for you to, like, fathom all of this, because it changes you. Like, the person we were before the war, those people are gone. We're different people now. And like, unless you live through this collective trauma that's 40 million people strong, and unless you felt and smelled and heard and lived through this bullshit for so long, you wouldn't understand. And for you, it's a silly thing, but for us, it's not a silly thing. It's our existence, without any exaggeration.
I just know that if it were happening here, I would leave as soon as possible, and I don't feel like there's any shame in that. I feel like being safe and prioritizing your own safety is actually like a very, like, I think that that's a very good thing. I don't
disagree with you.
This.
And in that situation, you would have the options to leave, and would probably be able to do it if that was your, objective, let's say. But that's such a small, tiny detail in the grand picture of what's happening, and I don't know, I feel like somehow fixating on it is, you're trying to paint Ukraine as, in the bad spot, as the bad guy, while we're facing one of the worst fascisms in known history. Like, at least the Nazis had had an ideology. You know, they were, you are all subhuman scum. We are superior, and therefore you must die. The Russians come here and are, oh, we're liberating you from the evil Nazis who don't let you speak Russian and whatever other bullshit about anti-Slavic bioweapon geese or whatever the fuck they were coming up with that day for their justification of the war.
Yeah, there's a lot of awful violence happening right now. I mean, I feel like I covered, like, if there's any questions you guys have for me, let me know. But I feel like I covered most of what I wanted to talk about.
I guess one of the things you were talking about was compromise. Like, why doesn't Ukraine just kind of like give Russia what it wants?
Yeah, like, I don't understand. Why not just let them have Crimea and be like, here, you can have this, and then, like,
right now it's not about,
like, yeah.
Because they won't stop, and Putin plainly said that. Right now, if you look at Russian propaganda, even just the tiny smidgens of Russian propaganda that are being translated, you will see that they will not stop. Right now it's Warsaw, Lithuania. They won't even stop at Germany if they can. It's like, this is one man's war. Like, for me personally, I'm one of the few Ukrainians who still consider themselves Russian, because for me, as a multinational, multi-ethnic person, identities don't clash. They stack on top of each other. The more languages I know, the better I am as a person, not the opposite. I have to be pure, clean, or whatever. And my spoken Russian is better than my spoken Ukrainian. I published more scientific articles in Russian than I did in Ukrainian. I've read more Russian literature than I did Ukrainian. And I still have friends, free Russians, I consider them, inside Russia, even people inside the armed forces who are on our side. And this is one man's war. This is Putin's war. No one else wanted this. No one else needed this. For Russia, this is an absolutely needless war. They're dying and fighting so Putin can keep his yacht, and Putin can, live his egotistical mania and midlife crisis. For us, it's a war of survival. What we've lived through, that's it. There's no coming back from that.
I guess from my perspective, and maybe I don't know anything, that's also possible. I just heard that, like, apparently, like, a lot of people in Russia, like, there's some people who don't like this war, and maybe they just want to have something to show for it. It's like, it's like, we're keeping fighting because we want to say that we did this for something. It's like, it would be really pathetic to be like, oh, we did this war and we got nothing to show for it. Maybe it's like, okay, they have Crimea, and that's Russia's justification for it. This was all worth it in the end. Okay, we can stop fighting now. We got what we want. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and maybe
they
Russia
already
just
had
doesn't want to
Crimea.
stop.
They already had Crimea. Ukraine was not attacking. Ukraine never planned on attacking the territories occupied by Russia.
Oh, I thought Crimea was a part of Ukraine.
It is part of Ukraine. It is still internationally recognized as part of Ukraine, but Ukraine was never actively trying to take back Crimea. Ukraine was living in the de facto reality of occupied Crimea. And Ukraine was still allowing passage of people into Crimea, into occupied areas of the Donbass.
Interesting.
Well, it's not interesting. These are, I don't know, these are basics I think anyone should be familiar with if discussing this kind of subject. And I don't know, expressing opinion to how many viewers after your frame drops.
Well, is there anything else you guys wanted me to say? Like, while I'm here?
Your opinion is, like, I would say, beautiful in the sense that you want peace and you don't want people fighting, and in the end you want the outcome with, the least casualties. But what you're saying, what you're propagating, it does not align with that. It in the long run, it aligns with the exact opposite of that. And even for us, people who hate war, who don't want war, this is a war of necessity. I've never seen a simpler war between right and wrong, between justice and injustice, between freedom and slavery. Literally, in the old sense of the word, not the redefinition.
Oh, nice! Wow, I thank you for Because I really like a lot of people I'm sure have like a lot of like feelings about me, like all these negative stuff. But like the truth is, like I do generally just want peace. And I just like have a hard time believing that like war is like ever this like justifiable thing. I just see all this evil going on. They just want it to stop. And I feel like too many people just want it to continue.
Is there
And
any
it's just,
war in history that you think was justifiable for a nation to fight?
I'd have to like look into them specifically. I just tend to think that like war in itself is not like ever a good thing.
Like any, I mean, like I don't know, like what about the Second World War? Like I think that's a pretty clear one, right?
That's the best. I think that's the best example that like I can think of that someone can give. Like this is a pretty justified evil. I have to really think about that because like I am against war in pretty much every
Thank
case.
you,
But
everyone.
if you,
Thank
Oh,
you,
yeah.
Rose.
Yes, to go. No worry, man.
Yes.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm back. So you would say that World War II was the most justifiable evil?
Well, I would say if you were to make an argument of this war had to happen, like because of the consequences and all the evil of the other side, I think World War II is a pretty good example to give of like a country that's just doing a bunch of bad and needs to be stopped. If you were to make that argument, that's probably the best one you can think of, or maybe there's a better one I can't think of right now, but that's a good one.
Okay. So is there well, how are you walking away from this conversation? You walking away from this conversation any different? Any differently how you walked into it?
I feel like I learned some things about Ukraine, and I'm always happy about that. I think the guy I talked to was nice, and I appreciate that. I tend to. I mean, I'm not like my opinions aren't like radically changed. Like, but I'll think about it. You know, I'm still anti-war. I'm still all of that. It comes with a more clear understanding. So that's always nice.
I mean, I think most people would call themselves anti-war generally. It's just, when war is thrusted upon you, you don't really get, like, you're not in a position to negotiate. You're not in a position to, like, pick and choose, right? I'm anti-assaulting people, but if somebody walks up to me with a bat and starts hitting me, I'm not in a moral position to, like, be picky and choosy about exactly how I don't like to like fight people and punch people, right? Then I'm in a position where I have to defend myself. Ukraine is in that position now. Ukraine can't just like dodge an invasion,
To like be okay with that argument if it was like the people that wanted to fight could fight and the people that wanted to leave could freely leave. If people were strong enough that they wanted to defend their country and there was enough people who were willing to do so, then I'd say go at it. I wouldn't have a huge issue with that.
I think there is. I mean, again, I think conscription is a necessity in a time of war because if you need forces, you need forces. And other countries don't really like abide by this moral structure of like, well, we don't want to force anybody to fight. So you want to be able to fight on a level playing field. You don't want to restrict yourself in those ways. But also, it's not just about like, when they stop people from leaving, it isn't just about like, hey, we need you to fight. It's also about participating in the economy. People talk about how much Russia is suffering. The people are suffering because of the economic this and that. And I mean, it sucks that Russian citizens are having some economic consequences for the government's decision. But the Ukrainian economy has been absolutely massacred by the invasion. And if even more people leave the country, what that's going to cause is even further economic catastrophe when they're trying to keep the economy afloat. And then it causes even further disaster. They need people to participate in the economy, work jobs, they do what's necessary,
Yeah, and that's probably true. I just think that like if people want to leave and want to have a better life, let them have that better life. I mean, I'm pro-immigration,
But do you think people are leaving to have a better life, or do you think they're leaving temporarily in order they want to come back one day to a liberated Ukraine? Because I couldn't meet a single refugee that was like, I want to live here forever now. Most of them were like, I want to go back as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they do want to come back. I mean, depends on the person.
The majority of border crossings are now into Ukraine, not out of Ukraine. So this isn't even a huge sticking point because most people don't even want to leave. More people are coming back than leaving the country. It's been like that for a few months.
Well, that's great. Then if that was the case, then why not just let them leave freely then, if not that many people want to leave anyway?
I mean,
It just seems like the forcing.
I guess, like, the thing is, even if you were to negotiate to convince me that, like, again, like, I've already explained the government's thinking about this, but let's say you would convince me that it was a moral wrong, it's still not at all enough to convince me that, okay, I guess we shouldn't support Ukraine, because there's no way you're going to be able to find a country that has a perfect government that's never done wrong and it's great in every way, so you know that every dollar you possibly give them could never, ever, ever be misused. That's just not how the world works. If that was the case, then there would be no aid, there would be no support for other countries. We wouldn't have helped the Soviets during World War II, who were much more flawed than the Ukrainians are in this war. So I again, like, I think the moral necessity of support trumps any failings that have been brought up in this conversation of the Ukrainian government, even if I don't even agree with you that it's a failing. Even if I was to, but if I was to extend the hand and agree with you that it's a failing, it still wouldn't be enough to trump it.
Like I'm not saying that, like, yeah, Ukraine has like made some mistakes, but like I understand, like, Russia, like, generally speaking, they're probably worse. They've probably done a lot worse stuff than Ukraine has in this war. Like I can understand that point. Like I'm not trying to say that, like, obviously Ukraine's not a saint, but I don't think that, like, I get what you're trying to say. I just would prefer if people have that freedom. I don't know. I don't think
I
that's
would
a
prefer
lot
that
to ask.
too. I prefer that too, but that's just not the reality of the situation. I think the easiest way to return to that freedom is to win the war.
But if nobody is wanting to, if more people are coming back in than leaving, then what's the harm in just letting people leave if they want to leave? It just seems like needlessly punishing people otherwise. I don't know. It doesn't.
I mean, I don't think it's like the biggest moral necessity or strategic necessity, but the Ukrainian government is trying to pull every trick in the book it can to defend its country. And this is one of the tricks it's trying to pull out with. We got to keep people in the country to make them participate in the economy and to make sure that we constantly have access to a high manpower pool, even if right now we have a lot of people volunteering to fight.
Yeah, I can't support that. Yeah, I can't. That's too far for me.
Well,
But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I
you
think
have a good
that's
one.
it.
Yeah, I think that's it.
You too. Thanks.
You have a good one. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.